welcome back after the break. So, as announced, I will present you SAP Decision Service Management within the next 1 hour or so. My name is Lechner. I'm working at MSG since 2005, so quite some time now, and I'm responsible architect in the custom development division of MSG. So what I want to present you is SAP Decision Service Management, or how you can avoid custom code. So there should be one question that comes to your mind immediately. We are all developers, so what we do is we develop coding. Why and how should we avoid coding? So it's true, our job is to create coding, to develop coding, to implement coding in order to fit some business needs, but there are some examples where you should not develop code, where you should use some tools that SAP provides, and one example are decisions. So hopefully I can convince you that this is true within the next 1 hour. Let's see. So first of all, I will give a short introduction and motivation concerning the business case that Victor shortly introduced, and after that I will give you a very, very brief introduction to SAP Decision Service Management concerning the overall architecture. After that, we will see how Decision Service Management works, how you can model your decisions within SAP Decision Service Management, and then, as usual, we have some questions and answers. Okay. So Victor already said a few words about the business background. We are in industry insurance. So we are issuing insurance certificates for transports, and these certificates shall be issued depending on the overall risk of the transport. And the risk shall be determined automatically, and there should be one overall risk that comes out of this determination, which are typically these street-like colors, red, yellow, green. And there should be consequently made a decision within the system if a workflow should be triggered or not. So if the risk is very high, no transport certificate should be issued, and the workflow should be triggered so that the clerk can look at the case and decide whether to issue the certificate or not. So to make life not too simple, the overall risk depends on several categories. Perhaps you've seen that within the UI5 app. Victor entered a lot of data in there. He was quite fast, so I repeat all this data. There are several categories, for example, route and value of the transport. That's one combination that has to be evaluated, and there is a sub-risk defined by that. The transport value, coverage type, and transport medium in another one, and the last one is the combination of weight, packing, and the transport medium. And the combination of these three risks determines then the overall risk, and that's determined by a weighted evaluation of the single risk categories. So that's the business case. And, well, usually when you make a decision, it's not black and white. There are some intermediate shades of gray in between, and these are the yellow risks. The yellow risk is where business is not sure if it's good to issue the certificate or not. So in order to get some insight, if we have a yellow risk, usually the transport certificate is issued, but on some randomized decision, the workflow shall be triggered. And this shall be easily switchable within the system. Okay. So let's take a look how this use case would be implemented within a classical SAP development project. What would happen? Business has a demand, business has requirements, so business will first write a blueprint where they will write down the constraints and rules, the business rules, or they will define a decision service. Business rules, decision service are nearly equivalent. In addition, business has some non-functional requirements, so they want to have an understandable representation, because these rules are called business rules, because business wants to know what happens. They want to have a flexible way to change the rules, so they want somehow have the power to change the rules. And what's also important, they want to be ready for audits. That's very important when it comes to transports, because every single transport is registered, and there are decisions taken on the risk. And if the insured person says, why was this a red risk? That's not possible because that's in my policy, there's written something different. They have to show the decision path. Okay, so that's what business will do. And then there is this borderline. IT gets the blueprint. And hopefully understands it. Because business and IT usually do not speak the same language. Those of you who have worked in projects will, I guess, state the same. Sometimes there is very good business, where they write very good blueprints from a developer point of view, but to be honest, most of the time it's not the case. But nevertheless, IT will start writing a specification, IT design, they will start the implementation, then they will test and hopefully go live. That's what happens. The question is now, what is the outcome? In a typical SAP development, well, you want some flexibility. So guess what? What happens? You will introduce some customizing. This is now a different example from my favorite SAP insurance component concerning tax handling. Taxes is also something very, very difficult, very tricky. And this is the stuff that is presented to business. So the complexity is one-to-one handed over to the customizing, and business will not be able to understand it. And what's also for sure, you do not do this customizing from top to bottom, but you make some jumps in there to make it not too easy to fill it out. And what will also come out is a lot of coding. And if it comes to decisions, to rules, there will be a lot of cases. There will be a lot of if-then-else statements like here, in order to evaluate this customizing. So that's what comes out, typically. What are the drawbacks when you do that? I mean, it's classical SAP development. So you have a loss of information between business and IT, because you have this borderline. You do not develop together with IT because they say, I do not care what you do with an ABAP coding, I do not understand it, that looks not so nice. Go away. Business is not able to understand the result of the development. The coding we do not need to discuss about, but also the customizing. We have customizings within our systems, view clusters with levels down, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels, where you even are not able to think about that. The view clustering was able to do that. Then there is no agility for enhancements, for optimizations, because when it comes to these decisions, as I mentioned before, these yellow risks, the company needs to learn how to adopt the decisions in order to make the world black and white. So, that's also a problem. Then you have a very, very small window of opportunities. So all changes that you make, customizing, coding, has to be transported within an SAP system. So it's classical transport mechanisms. No way to make an agile approach. You are bound to the release cycles of the project. Depending on the project, that's fast or slow. And it's not only depending on the transport from a technical point of view, but it's also depending on the budget. Because every change you make, you need a budget. Okay, so that's another problem. And for those of you who have worked a little bit longer within the business, there is a life after go live. That's maintenance. And there are release upgrades, because the customer wants to lift his NetWeaver whatsoever. He wants to introduce a new version. And these release upgrades might break your custom code. The more code, the more probable that it will break. So, not so good news. The question is now, I struggle a little bit with this tool here. It's not that intuitive like a Fiori. How can we overcome that? How can we overcome these drawbacks and build a solution that fits the business needs? That allows this flexibility, that allows this readability for business, that empowers the business to define their rules, to change their rules, and so on, together with IT. So the answer is maybe SAP Decision Service Management, but before I present you that, I want to use a few words concerning the basics, the theory behind decisions, rules, processes. So the very basic bottom line of processes and decisions is process definitions are quite stable, whereas decisions or decision services are very frequently changed. There are high change components. If you think about a credit application for a credit, for a loan, the process itself will always be the same. You apply, you enter some data, and then you get the loan or not. But the magic happens within the decisions. What are the parameters why you get the loan or not? So there are clear goals for a decision management system in order to fit these needs of decisions. So you need a clear separation between decisions, changing very often, owned by business, and the process, which is quite stable and usually owned by IT when it's implemented. Then you want this empowerment of the domain experts in order to be able to change the implemented decisions, and you want to allow permanent and incremental optimization of your decisions. So that's what is the goal of such a system. So we need a software system that has quite some stuff to do. It has to define the decision logic, it has to deploy the decision logic, you want to monitor it, you want to maintain it, and what it's all about is decision logic. So let's see what SAP has to offer concerning this stuff. It's a so-called Decision Service Management. And that's the overall architecture of the Decision Service Management. Has anybody of you already worked with Decision Service Management or heard of Decision Service Management? You don't count. Okay. Has anybody of you heard of BRF Plus? Business Rule Framework Plus? Okay. Then you might see some screens that you know. So this SAP Decision Service Management is built up within 4 components that are somewhat split up. 4 components for the business domain expert and components for the more or less IT. The business domain expert has some decision service modeling. He has a modeling environment where he can model his decisions. That's BRF Plus. He has some repository of the decisions, where the decisions are stored within the Decision Service Management, also BRF Plus. And there are some decision service lifecycle management tools in order to manage all aspects from a technical point of view, and you have some decision service versioning and reporting within the system. These are more technical stuff, technical components that are more or less owned by IT, so business doesn't want to see that stuff, and this is more the stuff that IT is interested in. What is very important here is, as you see here, the SAP NetWeaver Decision Service Management is not located within your SAP system or your non-SAP system. It's located outside. So the Decision Service Management is one central system where you define your routes. It's connected to all the other systems, your RFC, so you can get all the daily values, for example, out of the system, but it's not located within it. So from this Decision Service Management system, you deploy all the stuff to your different systems. That's very different to the classical transport. So, nevertheless, you somehow need to marry your decision logic, your deployed decision logic, to the process, and that's depicted here. So within your SAP application, you certainly will find a body, some code exit, where you put in this call of the decision service, and this call is then the stuff that you modeled within Decision Service Management. So the decision service is something like, from another point of view, a function module, something like that, which has a very clear purpose and has well-defined input and output parameters. And this decision service then uses rule sets. These rule sets are modeled in natural language. You have several artifacts that you can use, and what is very, very important, it has to be stressed, this IT, this is business. So all this stuff has to be modeled in order to be understandable by business and changeable by the domain experts. So in order to not to be misunderstood, domain experts. It's not the clerk that you meet and where you underwrite your policy. It's an expert. That's quite important. Okay. So that's it from the theoretical point of view. What we will do now is we will go through this picture step by step. So we will see how such a decision service is defined, what has to be done within the decision service management, and we will make a comparison. We will take a look at what has to be done within ABAP and what has to be done within the decision service management. And these two facts will then be compared concerning the readability of the stuff, so the enablement of the business, and concerning the coding effort. Because the more coding effort you have, the more coding you create, the more maintenance work you will have to do, and the more cost will arise. So let's take a journey through the DSM Wonderland. The DSM Wonderland is mainly this stuff here. So you have to create this decision service and then create your rule sets, create your rules, and so on. And that is what will be done now. So first step is the decision service itself. You need the interface. The purpose of our decision service is the risk classification of one single transport. That's the purpose. Not more, not less. And the input are all the relevant data of the transport. All the stuff that I mentioned before, the weight, how is it packed, what is the transport vehicle, is it just a car or is it a plane, what's the value of the transport, and so on. And the output is first the result for the risk classification. So is it a red, a green, a yellow risk? And should the workflow be started or not? So that's it. So let's see, what would you do with an ABAP development? Well, typically you would create an interface and a class that implements that interface in order to model that, or you would do a function module, something like that. This is what you would do as developer. Within decision service management, you model this stuff. As I mentioned before, you have the possibility to reuse data dictionary objects, so you can reuse all the stuff that is within your backend, or you can completely decouple and define everything within DSM. And there are some goodies. You have the option to create a remote function module out of this modeling, or to create a web service. That comes for free. So let's see how this looks like within the system. No, come on. Here we go. So here we have the subnet viewer business client. And what I will start now is the BRF Plus Workbench, because this is the integrated modeling environment of the decision service management. So what you will see here is the complete modeling environment. Here on the left-hand side you have some navigation tree where you have your applications, which are something like packages within the ABAP. And here you have the detail screen, nothing is displayed up to now. And so let's take a look at the package for the risk assignment of the registration. Here you have some other artifacts. And as I mentioned before, the function represents the decision service. And here you see how you model it. So you just create your components, your context, your input parameters, and your result data object. And as you can see here already, the readability is quite high. So result data object, I think business understands that's what comes out of my decision service. And it's the result of the risk assessment for transport. Okay. So you can navigate into it and take a closer look. So for example here you see, let's go into edit mode. You can do a binding to dig, or you have no binding. Then you use some basic data types within BRF Plus. So that's possible, and you have some further possibilities where we didn't talk about yet concerning the requirements. Usually, the comparison of an attribute is bound to its type. So if it's textual, you can do some stuff. If it's an integer, you can do some stuff. But here you have even the ability to restrict that to allow a more distinct comparison for your data elements. So for example, you can allow only comparisons that are equals, if that is a requirement. So that's possible. You can also enter domain values. That's also possible. And, well, that's it. Concerning the gimmicks, we are now in a predefined user mode that's called simple. That's the one typically a business consultant or a business and domain expert would have. But there is also a built-in user mode that's called expert. And within this expert mode, we have to refresh the stuff. You get a little bit more buttons. For example, here you have code generation. And here you see you can also generate, well, hopefully you can see it, at least in the first few lines, generate a function module and a web service. That comes for free. But let's go back to the nicer, simple view in order to be able to read the stuff. So that's what's possible within DSM. So the coding effort within ABAP development, well, it's small. That's not the point. The definition of the interface, that's not an issue. Nevertheless, within DSM there is no coding effort. All modeling, all possible. Readability, even for this small, simple artifact, is not given concerning ABAP development from the point of view of a business expert, from a domain expert. The readability of the interface, well, is possible. It's not perfect, but it's possible. So that's already, I think, a win for the DSM, but it's not that clear. So I have better arguments. What would be the next step? What would you do next in order to model this decision within your development? Well, as we've learned before, you have this business decision that you make, depending on the risks. And there was this additional requirement when it's a yellow risk. You have to do some randomized workflow kickoff. So you want to modularize your system. You want to make different modules. These modules are called rule sets. Rule sets are brackets around rules, around simple business rules. And these rule sets have priorities and preconditions. So you enter a sequence, in what sequence have they to be executed, and you can enter preconditions. So shall a rule set be executed or not before it's executed? That's not really obvious why this is necessary, but if you think about real complex decisions, and a company that has spent a lot of time evaluating these decisions, it will come to a point, like in theory, where you have this 80-20 case. 80% of the decisions can be made with one rule set. But there are these 20%, or even only 10%, that need a completely different treatment, where there could not be found a decision within the first rule set. That's why you need a second rule set, but you only want to execute the second rule set when the first rule set did not find anything. It's also a question of performance, because if you have a lot of rule sets and you always evaluate them, but you already have found the right decision with the first rule set, why should you execute the other ones? So that's all you would need from a requirement point of view. So let's take a look what you would do within ABAP development. Rule sets, well, somehow classes, methods, something like that. And in order to make this stuff flexible, to bring in a sequence, you will make some customizing for the flexible sequence. And then, in order to combine these classes and the customizing, you will implement a little framework. In order to read out the customizing, instantiate the classes, walk through the classes, call the right methods, evaluate the preconditions, and so on and so forth. And the small framework will be getting bigger and bigger. Preconditions, well, sequence is easy within customizing. Preconditions, well, even another customizing, or you enhance this customizing and make it even better readable than it was before, because every new column enhances the readability, right? So That's also something that will put some effort into your development. Decision Service Management, you get that out of the box. Rule sets are there, can be used, and can be simply registered to the functions. That's very important from a customer point of view. Because if you deliver something, and MSG also, as Horia said, develops SAP standard software for SAP, so value-branded resellers. So we are SAP somehow, from that point of view of that software. So we need to think about how can a customer hook in and make his own decisions. And there it's important because then we as standard just define the interface and the customer can hook in by registering. That's possible. Priority is a simple customizing. Preconditions are also BRF Plus expressions. I will mention them a bit later on, but you can think of rules that can be evaluated in order to get a result whether rules that should be executed. And what's also important, here within your methods and classes you have some local data variables that you can define in order to store intermediate results and so on. That's also possible here within rule sets. So you can enhance the global context, which is defined by the interface of your decision service, by some local context variables. So let's take a look at the system to see if it's true what I told you. So here you see the assigned rule sets within the function. You can create another rule set. Here you have the name of the rule set, the text, and there you see you have a priority. So if it's the first one to execute or the second one, you have some further information concerning the infrastructure stuff. So is the rule set enabled? Because you can simply switch it off. You can see if there is a precondition assigned to the rule set, and you see some status if it's executable or not, or if it's inactive and so on. If we dive into the rule set, you see here, stuff I mentioned, enabled, switch it on or off, just tick the button, that's it. Doing that with preconditions within ABAP, tricky. Here you have the information which function you're assigned to. Here you see that you have no precondition assigned. Here you have the priority. You can simply enter it. And here you see a list of variables that's simply used. For example, the risk category of the countries, the sub-risk that I mentioned. You have the overall risk and the sub-risks. So here you have the risk category for the country. What's also possible, you can initialize the variables. So when you kick off this rule set, you can initialize these variables with some predefined values, like defining data with default in ABAP. That's all possible, but it's all possible within this modeling environment. And you can also use expressions to do that. So it's not just assigning a value like date is equal to sweet date, but you can make this really complex. You can make a complete decision tree in order to initialize such a value. That's possible. So that's it from the rule set point of view. So once again, what's the coding effort? Well, it's high. You have to implement that. As developer, you have fun to implement that, for sure, because that's something that's cool. To implement the framework, to implement the customizing and so on, to see how it works, to do the error handling and so on and so forth. But the coding effort is very high, and the value for the business is very low. You have fun, business doesn't. Within the rule sets, you have no coding effort. Once again, it's a modeling environment. You do modeling, so you model all the stuff. The readability, well, it's partially given because you have this customizing. Depending on how you design the customizing, it's readable or not. You can also do some documentation on that. So it's partially given. Within the decision service, it's plain text. So if you do the plain text properly, and do not some abbreviations like usually within the data elements in the DDIC, when it's just 10 spaces, then the abbreviation is really not readable anymore. There is no limit for the text. The only limit is the screen. You can put in any text there. So it's getting quite clear that also here decision service management is somewhat better than ABAP development, but the really cool stuff is yet to come. The content of the rules, it's the rules. So up to now we're just on the infrastructural level somehow. Now we get into the stuff where business comes into play. So what are the rules that define the basis for the decision and how are they defined? So typically business will define them in a textual form that looks like this. If, then, else. That's how typically business would define rules. That's how they see them. So from our point of view, as a developer, hey, business and me, now we talk the same language, now I understand what to do. I will implement if then else until SC80 does. So I will really implement a lot of them, depending on how much decisions, how much work I have to do. So, and then a warm welcome to if help. Because this is then no longer maintainable. You have a lot of ifs, you have cases, you have them somehow cascading. That's extremely difficult. Especially also, you do not implement them once, but within a project. Maybe business gets new ideas, maybe there is a change request. Have fun with enhancing this stuff. And what's also important, business will not be able to read it. Decision Service Management uses this natural language form in order to model the rules. There's also the possibility to enable and disable rules, once again just by clicking a button. And there are some further gimmicks, some further cool gimmicks that you didn't think about when you implemented the rules within your ABAP coding. For example, what about validity? Perhaps you need a validity of the rules. Let's not think about insurance, let's think about customer relation management. You want to make an offer to the customer, you want to make some discount within the next 2 weeks. Current example, Amazon Fire TV. There is some discount now for the Prime users for the next, 5 days. It's valid for the next 5 days. That's something that may be useful. And as within coding, you can define exit conditions. If one rule already fulfills the job, the next rule does not need to run, so you can define exit conditions in order to fulfill this. So let's take a look at the system. And this is now the stuff where really the value for business comes in. Hopefully you can at least guess what is written here. So let's take this rule, if then else. If, check if one country represents a red risk, evaluates the true, then change the value of the risk category to red risk. That's something that's not possible within a customizing to flip that. In the other case, change the number of countries representing a yellow risk. After processing, okay, that's a little bit clumsy, count the yellow risks from the root-based risk assessment. Okay, first I count, and then I have the number. Same here, and after that, I evaluate something, well, this F is a formula, in order to calculate the average risk. That's something business can understand, that business can even maintain. And concerning the other features, just to show you that I'm not pulling your leg, you have here this disable rule button, you have here once again the traffic light. By clicking this button, the traffic light will go gray. So this rule will no longer be evaluated. Concerning the other options, so here you have the validity, and you do not only have it from a date point of view, but also down to an hour, to a second. So that's all that's possible within the rule representation of the DSM. Okay, so as already mentioned, you have a very, very high coding effort. You have no readability concerning the ABAP development from a business point of view. I would even dare to say the readability from a developer point of view is quite limited, depending on who develops the stuff. Here, there is no coding effort, it's just modeling. Within the new versions of DSM, we even have this drag and drop features. But also if you have worked with PRF+, you always had to select that by a context menu. Now you can just do drag and drop. It's always possible. And the readability is extremely high, because it's this natural language form. It's sometimes a little bit clumsy, but it's okay on the average. So, now the question is, what comes next? Next comes the expressions. That's where the magic happens. So, how do you define the outcome of the rules? One example concerning making decisions are decision tables, another one are decision trees, formulas, and so on and so forth. And I want now to focus on the decision on the route-based risk, which depends on the country that is passed due to the transport and the value of the transported good. So these two are the conditions, and the outcome is it a yellow risk, is it a red risk, or is it a green risk? So what would you have to do with our development? Well, depending on the requirement, coding, tons of coding, customizing tables, I don't know. It's really depending on the requirement. Within Decision Service Management, SAP delivers 22 expressions. If you have this little lady installed called HANA, you have 24, because you have some HANA artifacts that are used. And if you take the example of the decision table, so you can think of it like an Excel. You have some columns, which are the conditions, and if one line is hit, then the result columns are evaluated and handed back to the caller. That's it. No more less. But you have some further nice features within DSM that makes life easier, especially for business. You can import and export this artifact, the decision table, to Excel. Because that's what business really can use. Excel is something they're quite powerful. Now when we talk about Excel, about decision tables, what do you think customers put into these decision tables? How many lines to make the decisions? Where do they go up to? Hundreds? Thousands? Hundreds? No? There are customers where there are 100,000 lines within the decision table. That's, for example, some seller of some quite popular mobile phones. They have quite big decision tables. And that's why SAP also implemented completeness checks and checks for gaps within the decision table, because you're not able to memorize 100,000 lines. Where is there a gap? So let's take a look how this decision table looks like. So we go here to the navigation bar, where you see we have already used quite some expressions within our function, within our rule sets. And here we have the decision table, or the decision tables. And here we have the risk category for the transport route. And that's it. So that's how easy it looks, and that's also how easy a business consultant is able to change it. Because here, you can do your value input, direct value input, and simply make it equal to, depending on what you do, contains only, contains any, and so on and so forth. So that's all possible. Here you can also enter ranges, you can enter these inequalities, and so on. Sorry. Okay. What's also possible, you have here several of these additional actions that I mentioned before, so you can check for completeness, you can check for overlaps. As you see here, we only entered some countries. So it's not all countries of the world. So I would expect that the check for completeness would tell me that I did not enter all countries. Oh, yes. So it states that there is a gap, that there are missing conditions, it's not complete, and it proposes one additional line that I can insert in order to make it complete. So that's possible. And that's also some nice feature. which would be quite some effort to implement within ABAP. And what I also mentioned is this export and import to Excel. That's it. So that's something that if you do some splitting of the development, you can create out of your decision table, hand over to business. Business can fill it, you upload it, that's it. You have your decision table in the system. So that's already quite some stuff, and I guess you agree, the coding effort within ABAP is high, in order to only deliver some expressions that are available within DSM. There's no readability, and once again, within DSM, it's a little bit repeating, coding effort, non-readability very high. Usability extremely high for business. That's something that they really can work with. That's something that they know, the business experts know what is a decision table, what is a decision tree, how do I have to fill it. So another point for DSM, and another way to avoid custom code. So what comes last is the call of the decision service. So somehow you have to call it from the ABAP backend. Okay, that's ABAP. So there is no way to bypass that. That cannot be done by the business consultant, by the domain expert. So here within ABAP development, you call the class in the appropriate place in the backend, in the body whatsoever. And for DSM, you also have to do it, but you can be even more lazy. Because DSM even, even takes over that job. So as you see here, we do not see anything for the simple view. So we have to switch to the technical view. Refresh. And here we have a create code template, because we are even too lazy to do that. Copy, paste, finished. No, not really. You have to insert your context variables, so you have to insert your parameters. Still something to do. But you cannot fill them in wrongly. So all the assignment is given here, and also the way how this stuff is called is already in the right way. And you have also some further options. For example, enable the so-called lean trace. That's a tracing mode in order to make the stuff audit ready. So just tick that, apply it, and then you will see here, for example, for those who have watched, that this new parameter entered the game. So that's it from DSM point of view. So even here, the lazy ones of us have some good argument to use DSM. So here, I mean, that's something just for the sake of completeness. You have coding effort, but the coding effort even here is smaller when you use DSM. And the readability in both cases, no. But why should the business consultant, the domain expert, want to read how the decision service is called within the backend? He doesn't care about that. That's not where the value comes into play. So that's already quite some stuff concerning the tackling of the requirements. So let's recap a little bit. Did we tackle all requirements, all the business requirements? Yes. We implemented a decision service with an interface. We implemented the rule sets. We could make some randomized stuff. We have quite some expressions in order to model the real core of the decisions. For example, decision tables, for example, formulas, and so on and so forth. But we had some additional requirements, some non-functional requirements. There was one requirement that stated it should be easy to change for the functional expert. So up till now, it's okay to change for the expert, right? So you can read it, you can somehow navigate, it's okay. But so within ABAP, well, customizing maybe that's easy to change, depending on the customizing coding, no. DSM it's possible, but there is some further support. You have so-called catalog views, and you have a so-called simulation functionality that allows you to simulate your decisions without connects to the backend. So that's also a feature that is really useful for the business consultant, for the business domain expert, because you can change the stuff, you can simulate it and see it in real time what went wrong or if he adjusted the stuff correctly. So, and what also comes from my point of view to this requirement, easy to change documentation. You have to document the stuff in order to make it understandable. Especially you have to document the stuff in order to make it traceable. So within ABAP, well, documentation, yes, within customizing, for sure we can document and we should document. Coding, yeah, everybody of us. Creating documents, classes, interfaces, even single methods, I know everybody does. That's nearly 70% of our time. Yeah, that's a good one. Hopefully the comments within the coding are somewhat clear. Within DSM we have fully supported documentation, and versioning is possible. So we can even distinguish versions within the documentation. So let's see if I tell you the truth. So I mentioned before, easy changeable. Let's see if I'm in the right mode. In the right mode. So let's go to simple mode. And here I mentioned this catalog view. This catalog view is some predefined view where you group your artifacts within the DSM with respect to business aspects. So as you've seen perhaps within the tree, you had some expressions that were technical. You need that. You have, for example, loops. If you give in a table within your decision service, you somehow have to loop through the table in order to evaluate each entry within the table. In our example, that's the root that was handed over as a table. But does the business consultant take care, is somehow interested that there is a loop? No. This expression is completely nonsense for him. He's not interested in that. And that's where catalogs come into play. You can here group the artifacts and take, for example, only the artifacts that are relevant for the risk assessment based on the root. And there are just two artifacts that are relevant for that. It's the decision table, and that's the formula where you calculate the average risk. And that's all that he needs to see. And that's all that he sees. So if you want to change something there, he just goes to this catalog and says, okay, I want to change something here. So let's go to edit mode. Within Congo, well, I need to make some adjustments. So we have to change here the upper limit. We have to go to 20,000. And consequently, we have to change this here. We have to go also to 20,000. Okay. So let's save it. And as I made the change, and perhaps some other domain expert wants to see what happened, I can make here some documentation. As you see here, it's just a text field. So change on 4th of September to conference. I save it, I activate it, and that's it. That's what the business consultant can do. And now, you can start the simulation of that stuff. So here are some infrastructure stuff that you would have to explain to the guy who evaluates it. So let's check. Congo was changed, and before it was 18,000. Now I switched it to 20,000. So if I go below 20,000, let's say 19,000. Yeah. It should be a yellow risk. Yeah, it's a yellow risk. So that's already quite cool to do that simulation within every expression that you change. But what's even cooler you can also do the simulation on the level of the decision service. So you can simulate your complete decision service. Let's take a look. So here you have the importing parameters that are the ones that you enter within the UL5 GUI, within the Fiori app. And then make a simulation. You can even store variants or import test data from an Excel. This variant saving is something like you can also do within function modules. So here you have a test case concerning a yellow risk. You can execute it. See what happens. Okay, it's a yellow risk. No workflow. That's already good. But what happens if you made an error within the decision service? You simulated the complete decision service. How do you find out if there's an error? Where's an error? You can execute the decision service and let you show the complete path, the complete trace to the decision, step by step by step by step, with every outcome of every single step. What happened, where, and when. So here you see that the decision table was evaluated row by row. And what happened? Did it meet the condition? No, did not meet the condition. Hopefully you see it. DE is not equal to CD. So that's very powerful, and as you see here, it's Laptop Pro technology, so it's not that cool to go through such a huge amount of data. You can also export it to Excel. And here you have the technical identifiers that are quite interesting for the technician who has to check if there's an error. So that's also something that comes for free. And that's something that's also used for the auditing stuff. So let's go back. So that requirement is fulfilled. Agility, as mentioned before, you have the usual release cycle plus project management stuff, budgeting, and so on and so forth. With DSM, in principle, you have no connection to release cycles. You can even do a hot deployment to production. You change the stuff, you test the stuff, deploy it to production, it's active immediately. For those of you who work in projects, some of you might say, oh, within my project, I'm quite happy if they can transport in the right way from development to test and not from test to development. So there is also a workflow within DSM to ensure that not somebody just clicks a button and you destroy your productive environment. So let's take a look, because we changed the one decision table concerning the decision. So now we come to this new component. That's the Decision Service Management. That's the stuff that was on the right-hand side concerning the components of the decision service. This is now something that is hosted by IT. And here you have the managed systems, so the systems where you want to deploy the stuff. And here you have all the services that are assigned. And here you see we have this transport risk assessment. And you see we already have some deployments being done, and we can do another deployment. So we select this one, press the deploy button, the workflow is not active, because I know what I do. We can do some documentation. Finish deployment due to conference. And here you have the option to immediately deploy it, or as mentioned before, you also can do it here as of date and time. Perhaps this should only be deployed at a later point in time, so it's changed now, but it should be deployed later. Let's press the deploy button. Then hopefully the system works. Yes, it does. So here we have some success messages, which says newly generated source code safe without syntax errors. and source code has been activated on a separate point of time. So that's where I tricked a little bit, like a magician. You did not do any source code within DSM. You modeled everything. But SAP creates the source code for you. And SAP is also responsible that the source code works. So you do the modeling of all the benefits for business, and from a system point of view, you have the performance gain of a completely generated ABAP coding. And in the meantime, so we are now on NetWeaver 740, the generated coding is quite readable, so you can even debug that stuff. But that's not your responsibility, that's not your cup of tea. That's the problem. If this coding does not work, because it's wrongly generated, problem of SAP, not of you.
So you never touch it?
Huh?
You never touch it?
You mean you never patch the...
You never touch the code that's being generated?
No. You do not touch the code. So it's even not the namespace that you develop in. If you do custom development, you would set namespace or the namespace that you serve by the customer. This here is namespace / FTT /. And FTT is the predecessor of BRF+. So that's why this namespace is reserved. Okay, so that's possible. Then, what can we do else? Tracing. There was a little requirement concerning tracing. Tracing within ABAP, well, it's quite some fun to store the way of the decision process within your system. Well, you need first tracing, then you need somehow the persistency of the tracing, and as business wants to see the tracing results, you need some tools to do the visualization. UFI, for example, something like that. You get that for free in DSM. You have a built-in link trace functionality, you have a disclosure functionality, and you have some UFI-based tools in order to evaluate all that stuff. So, let's take a look. The link trace looks somewhat comparable to the trace that you've seen from the simulation tool. So I have to switch again the role to the export that I am and go to trace. And then here, you see all the traces that have been stored. So we tested around with this little app of Victor quite several times, or I tested around with the report. And here you have all the traces stored, and if you open them, you see you have all the information that you need in order to show what happened when. So it's completely comparable to the simulation stuff. From a technical point of view, it's a little bit less information because otherwise the database growth would be a little bit high. And you can also export that to Excel and get all the information. So that's all what comes for free. And what's also cool and new since NetWeaver 740 is SAP decided to make some OData services in order to evaluate the decision the traces. Because you want to learn. You cannot learn from 100 lines of decisions that have been made, but you want to make them somehow more handy. So you can here take a look at the traces, and then you see this nice UFI app, where you see concerning the risk evaluation, what happened, where, and how often. And you can dive into the notes and see what happened when. It's a little bit rudimentary, it's just a prototype, so it's just to show what's possible. You see result 1, everything risk category 1, 15 calls. Result 2, 1 red risk, happened in 10 calls. And this is how you can now evaluate your rules and fine-tune all the stuff. And that's also a tool that comes for free. And here, the developer comes into play, you can adopt it. because what comes is this OData service, and you can adopt then the visualization as you want within Fiori, within UI5, Web Pro, whatsoever. So that's already something that's new, and that's really brings some additional value to the DSM from my point of view. So upgrade, well, that's just for the sake of completeness because I mentioned it. Well, you have to check your coding, and DSM, where you have to check the call of your backend. Perhaps you have to regenerate it, but that's quite unlikely because DSM BRF Plus is quite established, so there is a low probability that something will change. So that's already it for the DSM. Hopefully I did not take too much time concerning the 1 hour I have. So what are the key takeaways from my point of view that hopefully I could transport to you? So can you avoid any custom coding by the introduction of DSM? So should you go to the customer and say, buy DSM, you will no longer have custom code? No, that's not the case. That's definitely not the case. Processes, interfaces, UI, all that stuff, classical development. There is our coding to do, there is JavaScript coding to do, whatsoever. But with this SAP Decision Service Management, you have a tool that extremely supports you when it comes to decisions, when it comes to business rules. So every requirement that somehow represents a decision service, somehow represents a business rule. Then you should think and say, no other coding. There's tools within SAP that can help me and that empower the business user. So besides the reduction of the coding, that's quite important from IT management point of view. You have a greater transparency of your rules that you implement. It's also important for a company. You have the empowerment of business. Business can change the stuff themselves, and then they're also responsible themselves. No longer SMI messages or error messages put to you because something didn't work. You have a very high agility with DSM concerning, for example, the hot deployment, and you reduce the complexity. Because within your coding, you just have the more or less stable process. All the complexity or the business logic concerning decisions is taken out of this process. And the last but not least, what's a bit difficult to show you within this 1 hour session is it really makes fun to model decisions with this DSM. Because you have very quickly some successful implementations, and you can work together with business. So it's no longer this separation, the blueprint, throw it over and implement it, and business will say, cool functionality, but that's not what I wrote in the blueprint. But here you can really work together, stick together, implement some rapid prototypes, and see how everything evolves. So it's really great fun to do it. So that's it from my side. The obligatory question and answer part. Do you have any questions up to now? Yeah?
You said that there are 22, 24 expressions that DSM can handle. And my question is could it happen that you simply just cannot handle with these 24 expressions whatever is required in the decision set? And if so, what would be the standard? So how would you handle that?
Maybe there is a decision that you cannot handle with the 22 expressions. Maybe there is a more comfortable way to deal with the decisions. So you can enhance, you can build your own expressions. The very nice thing about DSM and BRF Plus is everything is APIfied. You have every object that you have seen within the Web Pro has an API behind it, and a well-defined interface. And you just have to implement that interface in order to build your own expression. Just means quite some stuff to do. So there is a guideline from SAP how to do that. It's 140 pages, I think. But you can do that, and SAP themselves do that. So these 22 expressions is a bare NetWeaver. If you have, for example, some financial service components in there, like claims, FSCM, or FICO, you will see that you have some more expressions and some more actions because they decided to build their own expressions in order to tackle some business cases and to make life more comfortable for the business. Any further questions?
I would have another one. You said that there is versioning in ESM, and versioning. There is versioning also in the ABAP workbench, but no one really ever uses it, or very. It's not really automatical. It's not like the classical subversion or something that you just check out code and it's automatically done, but you have to do it manually. And I was wondering how DSM handles this.
So the versioning is done like in ABAP. So you have to save. If you make a change, then a new version is created. That's how it is. So you cannot.
But every time you save, or you have to go explicitly to version manager?
Save and activate. If you save and activate it.
Every activation is a new version.
Yeah. That's something you have to keep in mind when you implement tools for the first time, because you will very often save, check, activate, and so on, and your version list gets really high. You have a tool that's also delivered with BRF Plus or DSM, where you can erase all the versions. Just keep the last one, because from the development point of view, at some point in time we're finished, and just the last version is of interest. Any further questions?
Question?
Mhm.
Does DSM have some sort of authorization concept? You said if you install it as a separate system, you basically give some experts access to the logic or business logic for other systems. Can you restrict that? For instance, you have a CRM expert and ERP financial expert.
There is there's the standard authority checks within DSM that you can use, and there are a lot of bodies that you can use. So you have to define your concept concerning the authorization, and then you can apply that. For example, what some customers did, you saw these decision service with the separate columns and result columns and so forth, and they restricted for some users the access to just one column. So they saw all 5, 6 columns, but they could change only one. So that's possible. Further questions? If it's not the case, thank you for your attention.